Welcome to the Daily News Currents. Today is Wednesday, February 5th, and for today's headlines we have North Korean troops no longer seen in front lines fighting Ukraine. These bombos know what you don't know. Guantanamo Bay prepares for President Trump's migrant surge. Trump has a deal with Natal when they meet Tuesday. Will he take it? Trump administration adds fine print to fork resignation offer, deepening confusion. North Korean troops no longer seen on front lines fighting Ukraine. North Korea sent its best troops to aid Russia in its war against Ukraine, but after months of suffering severe losses, they have been taken off the front line. North Korean soldiers who joined their Russian allies in battle against Ukrainian forces have been pulled off the front lines after suffering heavy casualties, according to Ukrainian and U.S. officials. North Korean troops sent to bolster Russian forces trying to push back a Ukrainian offensive inside Russia's borders have not been seen at the front for about 2 weeks, the official said after requesting anonymity to discuss sensitive military and intelligence matters. The arrival of around 11,000 North Korean troops in Russia in November caused alarm in Ukraine and among its allies in the West, who feared the deployment signaled significant escalation in the nearly 3-year-old war. But in just 3 months, the North Korean ranks have diminished by half, according to General Oskar Skirsky, Ukraine's top military commander. Ukrainian troops who have fought against the North Koreans have described them as fierce warriors, but disorganization in their ranks and lack of cohesion with Russian units have quickly driven up casualties, a Ukrainian official said. Since arriving on the battlefield, the North Korean soldiers have been left to fend for themselves, advancing with few armored vehicles and rarely pausing to regroup or fall back, according to Ukrainian officials and frontline troops. Critics of Ukraine's military leadership criticized last year's offensive into Russia's Kursk region as a waste of resources at a time when the military inside Ukraine is faltering in the face of prolonged Russian attack. But President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine has insisted on holding the territory for as long as possible as a bargaining chip in future peace negotiations. The longer Ukrainian troops hold Kursk, the more embarrassing it becomes for Russia's President Vladimir Putin. Though Mr. Putin has vowed to expel the Ukrainian forces, he has been hesitant to divert troops from the main Russian operations in eastern Ukraine, in part to similarly strengthen his hand in future negotiations. Into that fray steps Kim Jong-un, North Korea's leader and an ally of Mr. Putin. It was Mr. Kim who proposed sending troops to assist the Russians in Kursk, according to U.S. intelligence agencies, although Mr. Putin quickly embraced the idea. Many of the soldiers are among North Korea's best-trained special operations troops, but the Russians appear to have used them as foot soldiers, sending them forth in waves across fields studded with landmines to be moved down by heavy Ukrainian fire. The American official said the decision to pull the North Korean troops off the front line may not be a permanent one. It is possible, they said, that the North Koreans could return after receiving additional training or after the Russians come up with new ways of deploying them to avoid such heavy casualties. In any case, the fight to expel the Ukrainian forces from Kursk is far from over. A few weeks ago, Ukrainian forces launched a new offense in the region, but they have been hammered by Russian defenses. Though the Ukrainians took about 500 miles of Russian territory when they swept across the border last summer, Russian forces have been able to retake about half of that. The Ukrainian incursion into the Kursk region in August shocked the Kremlin. It was the first time in 10 years of fighting between the two countries, including Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022, that Ukrainian troops had taken and held Russian territory. In a speech this week, Mr. Zelensky praised the Ukrainian troops fighting in the Kursk region, saying their efforts created a buffer zone to protect northeastern Ukrainian territory from an additional Russian offenses. Mr. Kim most likely had his own motivations for helping Russia in Kursk. American officials say he hopes Mr. Putin will repay the favor in the future, providing help for North Korean missile programs and diplomatic support at the United Nations. North Korea has also supplied Russia with millions of artillery shells, which now account for about half of the munitions that Russia fires daily, along with rockets and missiles, according to Western and Ukrainian intelligence officials. Russia has been providing North Korea with oil, food, and some weapon upgrades. Last summer, a few months before Ukraine launched its incursion into Kursk, Mr. Putin met with Mr. Kim in Pyongyang, where they restored a Cold War-era treaty of mutual defense and military cooperation between their countries. These bombos know what you don't. Know what you don't know. People are constantly looking at the behavior of others and come up with ideas what might be going on in their heads. Now, a new study of bonbos adds to evidence that they might do the same thing. Specifically, some bonbos were more likely to point to the location of a treat when they knew that a human companion was not aware of where it had been hidden, according to a study which appears to the Proceeding of National Academy of Sciences. The findings add to a long-running debate about whether humans have a unique ability to imagine and understand the mental states of others. Some research say this kind of theory of mind may be practiced more widely in the animal kingdom, and potentially watching it in action was quite the experience. It was quite surreal. I mean, I worked with primates for quite some years now, and you never get used to it, says Luke Townrow, a PhD student at Johns Hopkins University. We found evidence that they are tailoring their communication based on what I know. Where's the grape? To see what bonbos might know about what humans around them know, Townrow worked with Chris Crumpe of Johns Hopkins University to devise a simple experiment. It was always challenging for us that animals don't speak, so we can't just ask them what they're thinking. We have to come up with creative experimental designs that allow them to express their knowledge, says Crumpe. The study involved 3 male bonbos, all living in an education nonprofit called the Ape Initiative. During each experimental trial, Tonro sat across from one bonbo, who was in an enclosure, but looking through an opening covered by mesh. The bonbo watches a helper place a treat such as a grape under one of 3 blue cups that were lined up in a row. We established a cooperative context to this task, because if I knew where the treat or the food item was hidden, I would reveal it, and then the bonbo would be able to receive that as a reward, he explains. Sometimes, Tonro could see what was happening when the treat got placed under the cup. Other times, his view was obscured by a barrier, so he didn't know where it was. No matter what he had or had not seen, Tonro would briefly scan the cup saying, where's the grape? And then wait for 10 seconds. It turned out that when Tonro had enjoyed an unobscured view of the treat being hidden, the bonbos usually sat still and waited. But when his eyes had been behind the barrier, which blocked his view and made it so he couldn't see which cup had been picked as a hiding place, the bonbos tended to point their fingers through the mesh and tap towards the right cup. There's definitely times where you can see that they're very frantically trying to get my attention and just pointing, because they really want me to act, but they have to wait the whole 10 seconds because it's a controlled setting, says Townrow. In the real world, the results didn't necessarily surprise Crumbre, since he's worked with apes for over a decade and has a strong suspicion that they understand when another is ignorant of certain information. He says it was just very exciting to find a way to test that so that bonbos could easily express that understanding. While it would be nice to see the study conducted with more individuals, it's a valuable contribution to the theory of mind debate, says Catherine Crockford of the University of Cognitive Sciences, CNRS, in Lyon, France. At least 2 of 3 bonbos communicated more to an ignorant than knowledgeable onlooker who was in a position to help gain access to food once the bonbo made the necessary information available, she says. This suggests that the bonbo could hold 2 ideas in its mind simultaneously. The bonbos knew the location of the food, and that the human might have different information about the location that needed updating by the bonbo. Previously, Crockford and some colleagues found that wild chimps are more likely to emit alarm calls when seeing a risk like a snake if those nearby had not already indicated that they had seen the danger. Taken together with this new lab experiment, she says, these studies in alarm and food contexts demonstrate that the capacity is not confined to a specific, narrow context. Guantanamo Bay prepares for President Trump's migrant surge. About 200 Marines and soldiers arrived over the weekend as the base faces its most drastic change as the Pentagon opened a prison there after the September 11th attacks. About 200 Marines and soldiers landed at Guantanamo Bay over the weekend to provide security and began setting up a new tent city for migrants as officials comply with President Trump's order to prepare the Navy base for as many as 30,000 deportees. The small base in southeast Cuba is on the verge of undergoing its most drastic change as the Pentagon opened its wartime prison there after the September 11, 2001 attacks. The operation will require a surge of staff and goods to the isolated base, which is behind a Cuban minefield and is entirely dependent on air and sea supply missions from the United States. Everything from pallets of bottled water and frozen food for the commissary to school supplies and government vehicles come twice a month on a barge. Fresh fruits and vegetables for the 4,200 residents come on a weekly refrigerator flight. Fulfilling the president's order could grow the population there tenfold because of the staff it would take to operate the encampment, which is on an unpopulated corner of the base, far from the prison as well as the commissary, school, and suburban-style neighborhoods for service members and their families. In response to Mr. Trump's order, U.S. forces have already put up 50 Army Green tents inside a chain-link fence enclosure adjacent to a barrack-style building called the Migrant Operations Center. Their first wave, about 50 Marines, arrived Saturday night from Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. The next 50 arrived on Sunday. The military declined to comment on its current capacity to receive the migrants or on what other provisions were inbound. The Southern Command, which has oversight of the troops assigned to the prison and the migration plan, would not say who was in charge of the operation or discuss a plan from 2017, obtained by the New York Times, for detaining the first 11,000 migrants there. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has said that dangerous deportees may be put in detention facilities that currently hold 15 prisoners from the war on terrorism, among them 5 men who were accused of plotting the September 11th attacks. 15 prisoners have been held in 2 prison buildings with about 275 cells. Detaining migrants at that site would presumably require moving those 15 prisoners into one of the 2 buildings. But no decision has been made on whether some migrants would be housed at the wartime prison, a Defense Department official said on Saturday. Separately, 2 people with knowledge of detention operations said the consolidation had already happened this weekend. All of them spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss sensitive security arrangements involving the prison, which are sometimes classified. In his remarks last week, Mr. Hegseth also mentioned that about 6,000 deportees could be housed on the golf course, which is near the base McDonald's, Irish pub, and family housing. In any case, carrying out Mr. Trump's order would require a huge undertaking, said retired Major General Michael R. Leonard, a Marine who opened the prison in 2002. General Lenhart, whose expertise as a Marine was in engineering, also managed security for the migrant arrivals in Guantanamo in 1990s, when tens of thousands of Cubans and Haitians lived in tent cities around the base. At its peak, he said, in May 1995, the camp held 25,000 migrants, mostly Cubans. The base was so overwhelmed that a tent camp was even briefly put on the golf course. The operation was set up hastily and had portable latrines. As the numbers rose, the Navy closed the school and evacuated the families of service members to the mainland for 7 months. The base makes its own water for everything except drinking purposes, and, as it did then, would need to make much more. The 2 main sites that were used back then, a vast bluff overlooking the ocean and an abandoned airfield, now have new purposes. One is a closed military zone with the prison buildings and staff. The other is the courthouse facility called Camp Justice. President Trump's order called for expanding the Migrant Operations Center to accommodate 30,000 people. It is currently a 120-bed former barracks that in recent years housed Cubans, sometimes families, whom the U.S. Coast Guard found at sea trying to reach Florida. They were housed there until a third country agreed to receive them. The 2017 plan, reflected in a diagram of preparations for areas surrounding the Migrants Operations Center, shows 6 designated tent camps for more than 11,000 migrants and a nearby spot to house 3,640 Blue Forces, a military term for forces that are friendly to the U.S. military. The largest camp could house more than 3,000 migrants. By 2017, contractors had already built crude summer camp-style showers and toilet houses in cinder block buildings on the site. In the 1990s, General Lenhart said each tent encampment contained 1,500 migrants and was guarded by 200 troops, either soldiers or Marines, and that was just for basic security. The 1990s operation, known as Sea Signal, also had medical, logistics, and other support troops, as well as separate rapid reaction force in the event of unrest. It was not known whether the Department of Homeland Security or the U.S. military would handle processing, or what role, if any, would be assigned to the International Organization for Migration, which has an office on the base. Nor was it clear how it would be funded. Guantanamo is an expensive place to live and work. In 2019, the commander of detention operations estimated it cost more than $100,000 for each guard 9-month deployment to the facility. These troops are provided with housing, clothing, food, healthcare, entertainment, and transportation. Those living at Guantanamo today, in addition to sailors and their families, include schoolteachers, Filipino and Jamaican guest workers, and the prison guard force of mostly individual soldiers serving on 9-month tours. Mr. Hegseth did one of those tours from June 2004 to April 2005. He was the platoon leader of 40 or so men from the New Jersey National Guard who provided perimeter security for the detention center. But it is a much smaller operation today. Mr. Hegseth was part of a nearly 2,600 member military force that was assigned to the detention operation, which held 600 detainees on the former site of migrant camps. The airstrip was a busy place then, with resupply missions, troops, reporters, and members of Congress and the intelligence community flying in frequently. Now the prison has a staff of 800 military and civilian contractors and no longer has a media operation. An additional 111 military police from the New York National Guard were undergoing 3 weeks of training at Fort Bliss, Texas, before heading to a 9-month security mission at Guantanamo Bay. The situation was changing so quickly that when the unit departed last month, the Army said it would provide security for the detention facility, but the Pentagon said in a statement released on Thursday that the unit would secure the Migrant Operations Center. Trump has a deal for Netanyahu when they meet Tuesday. Will he take it? Israel Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's White House visit Tuesday will be rife with symbolism. He is the first world leader to meet President Trump since the inauguration 2 weeks ago. It will also be a crucial day for the future of the Middle East and Netanyahu himself. Negotiations have begun for the second phase of ceasefire deal that would end the war with Hamas and return all Israeli hostages from captivity in Gaza. Also on the table is a bargain that could reshape the Middle East for decades to come, a deal to open Israel's diplomatic relations with Saudi Arabia. Another central question to resolve: whether Israel will launch a military strike on a weakened Iran, shortened after a year of intense fighting against its proximities. Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, played a key role in persuading Netanyahu to accept the ceasefire's first phase, and Trump wants to see the deal continue until all hostages are free and the war is over, in order to focus on a Saudi-Israeli peace deal. The Israeli leader's allies, however, have threatened to bring down the government if Israel goes down that path and does not resume the war in Gaza and eliminate Hamas' rule there. The Tuesday meeting is actually critical to Netanyahu's ability to survive as the leader of Israel and to make sure that his coalition stays intact, said Gail Tashir, professor of politics at Hebrew University. I think Netanyahu wants exactly what Trump offers him, but I think his own coalition has a quite different vision. Netanyahu's political future and legacy. The main challenge for Netanyahu faces in Bezalel Smotrich, Israel's finance minister, who wants the war to continue until Hamas is destroyed, a task Israeli defense analysts believe is unrealistic, so long as Hamas continues to hold Israel's hostage and Israel does not endorse a viable alternative leadership for Gaza. Israel centrist opposition leader Yair Lapid said Monday that he would give Netanyahu a political safety net so the hostages release deal can continue and the government doesn't collapse should the prime minister's far-right allies pull support. Despite Israel pounding Gaza for over a year, the recent hostage release has seen dozens of masked Hamas fighters parade Israelis on makeshift stages before freeing them. Tal Shir, who's writing a forthcoming book about the Netanyahu era of Israel, believes that given Netanyahu's interest in retaining his coalition and staying in office, the prime minister might have an interest in returning to war. As long as he continues the war, Israel does not go to election, Tal Shir says. Israel does not have a public investigation of what happened on October 7th, and Netanyahu remains in power. Netanyahu faces another Gordian knot. He and Trump have their sights set on establishing Saudi-Israeli relations, but Riyadh in return demands a pathway to a Palestinian state. That prospect Netanyahu's allies and most of Israel's parliaments opposed even more fervently after the deadly Hamas-led attack on Israel October 7th. 2023 that sparked the Gaza war. They see a Palestinian state as a security threat to Israel and an undeserved reward to Palestinians after the attack. Victoria Coates, an analyst at the Heritage Fund in Washington, D.C., and a deputy national security advisor to Trump during his first term, said the U.S. president will find it difficult to satisfy the Saudi demand. As much as we might want to deal with Saudi Arabia, Israel is going to, particularly after October 7th, remain very, very mindful of its internal security. It has to, says Coates. So the deal that looked like it was pretty imminent in the 2020-21 timeframe may take a little bit longer now. Trump has also floated the prospect of relocating Palestinians from Gaza to neighboring Egypt and Jordan. Arab countries including Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia have firmly rejected the idea, as have Palestinians. Many Israelis want the hostages to return. On Saturday, family and friends cheered as American-Israeli hostage Keith Siegel was freed by Hamas. But many at the gathering of Siegel's extended relatives' home in kibbutz in central Israel expressed nervousness about the war resuming before all the hostages were free. Rabbi Steve Bernstein believes U.S. pressure can make the difference. We just hope and pray that Americans do everything they can to ensure that the Israeli government has the strength and courage to make sure that we reach the second stage of the deal, he said to NPR. That same evening, a few thousand Tel Aviv residents showed up to one of the weekly rallies celebrating the return of 3 Israeli hostages and demanding the government work towards returning all the remaining hostages still held by Hamas, many of whom are believed dead. At the rally, Shelley, who only gave her first name to speak frankly about U.S.-Israeli politics without repercussion, says she believes only Trump can push Netanyahu to seal another deal. I feel like Netanyahu didn't want a deal before, and he's doing it because Trump said so, she said. I think Trump's going to tell him, we're bringing every single hostage home. Trump administration adds fine print to fork resignation offer, deepening confusion. It's been a week since nearly all 2.3 million civilian employees of the federal government were presented with an offer. Agree to resign from your job by February 6th and keep your pay and benefits through the end of September. Now, with the deadline to accept the offer nearing, federal agencies have sent out new terms and conditions in the form of a sample contract agreement that employees were told can be used to memorialize the deal. It's unclear who from the government would sign the agreements or whether the contracts would be legally binding. Adding to the confusion, some of the sample contract language diverges from the first email, which came from the U.S. Office of Personnel Management with the subject line fork in the road, and other guidance presented to date. Employees who take the deal are expected to work through February 28th. For example, some of the sample contracts sent out state that employees who accept the fork offer are agreeing to work through February 28th to ensure a smooth transition of duties and will be put on paid administrative leave no later than March 1st. It is the first mention of any such dates tied to the fork offer. The original email did not make it clear that employees who resigned would necessarily be put on administrative leave at all. A frequently asked questions subsequently posted to OPM's website and shared by agencies poses the question, am I expected to work at my government job during the deferred resignation period? The answer provided is simply no. Even memos sent out with the same sample contract agreement summarized the deferred resignation offer as allowing eligible employees to keep their government pay and benefits to September 30, 2025, without any expectation of performing work. An acknowledgement that agencies don't have guaranteed funding past March. In a major departure from language shared earlier, the sample contract agreement that went out Monday to Environmental Protection Agency employees includes language that appears to acknowledge that federal agencies have no guaranteed funding past March 14th, when the latest congressional budget agreement expires. Subject to the availability of appropriations, employees shall remain on paid administrative leave up through and including September 30th, 2025, or such earlier date on which employee may choose to resign or otherwise separate from federal service, the simple contract language reads. Attorneys, federal employee unions, members of Congress, and others have warned federal employees that the promise of pay and benefits beyond March 14th is not guaranteed. It's important that you know right now, the federal government is only funded through March 14th, 2025, wrote Washington Senator Patty Murray, the top Democrat at the Senate Appropriations Committee, in an email. At this point, there is no funding allocated to agencies to pay staff for this offer. Additional caveats added to the deal. Another caveat added in the sample contract agreements addresses the question of whether employees who accept deferred resignation can take another job before September 30th. OPM's frequently asked questions tells employees, absolutely. We encourage you to find a job in the private sector as soon as you'd like to do so. The way to greater American prosperity is encouraging people to move from lower productivity jobs in the public sector to higher productivity jobs in the private sector. New language makes clear that employees must comply with ethics rules, which at some agencies require prior approval for outside employment. In another section, employees were asked to acknowledge that this agreement cannot be rescinded, except in the sole discretion of the agency head, which shall not be subject to review at the Merit Systems Protection Board or otherwise. The language indicates that the federal agencies would be able to rescind the agreement and that employees would not have the opportunity to appeal. The Merit Systems Protection Board is an independent, quasi-judicial agency that hears appeals from federal workers over issues involving federal employment rules. The sample contract agreement also asks employees to waive their rights to pursue through any judicial, administrative, or other process any action against agency that is based on, arising from, or related to employees' employment at agency or the deferred resignation offer, and to simply waive any claim that might be brought on by their behalf by a labor union or other entity. Attorneys General warn of misleading offer. On Monday, Democratic attorneys general from a dozen states, including New York, Michigan, Arizona, and California, issued a statement calling the deferred resignation offer misleading. President Trump's so-called buyout offers are nothing more than the latest attack on federal workers and the services they provide. These supposed offers are not guaranteed, wrote New York Attorney General Letitia James in a statement. Federal employees should be cautious and follow the guidance of their unions to protect their rights. The Trump administration pushed back against some of the criticism, arguing Monday that union leaders and their attorneys are doing their members a disservice. This is a rare, generous opportunity, one that was thoroughly vetted and intentionally designated to support employees through reconstructing, said McLaureen Pinover, spokesperson for OPM. Instead of spreading misinformation and using workers as political pawns, they should make sure federal employees have the facts and freedom to make the best decision for themselves and their family. That is all for today. Thank you so much for listening. Bye!